Everybody, and welcome back to Be Like Christ. We're going to talk about Luke chapter 19 in 5 minutes. If you'd like this book with all of the handouts of each chapter in it, or if you'd like to support this channel on Patreon and what we do here, there are links down in the description below. So let's get into this. Luke 19. When did the events of Luke chapter 19 happen? Well, like most of the Gospel of Luke, this occurred during Jesus' earthly ministry, roughly a 3-year span of time from 30 to 33 AD. In terms of our characters in this chapter, we have 4 that I'd like to highlight. The first one is Jesus. He's the Messiah, the anointed of God, who's come to redeem Israel. Zacchaeus. This is a Jewish tax collector who Jesus meets in the city of Jericho, and the Bible mentions that he was very short in stature. And then finally, 2 characters here, the nobleman and his servants. These are characters in Jesus' parable about the 10 minas. In terms of the geographic location, Jesus was on his way through Jericho, headed to Jerusalem. And so when he left Jericho, he passed through Bethphage and Bethany, and then he finally got to Jerusalem where he cleansed the temple. Okay, so let's break the chapter down now into the major sections. I've got 4 divisions. The first one, verses 1 through 10, Jesus has an encounter with a guy named Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was a man who Jesus met in Jericho. He was a Jewish man, and he was also a chief tax collector. Jesus found Zacchaeus in a sycamore tree he had climbed up, and he told Zacchaeus that he was going to go to his house that day. The surrounding crowds kind of grumbled at this because they didn't really like tax collectors very much, and they considered Zacchaeus to be a sinner. But when Zacchaeus was informed that he was going to host the Lord that day, he repented of all of his past dishonesty, and Jesus rebuked the surrounding crowd for looking down on him. In section number 2, we have a parable from Jesus. It's the parable of the 10 minas. Verses 11 through 27. Jesus told this parable because there were some who supposed that the kingdom of heaven was to appear immediately. That's what the text says. In the parable, there's this nobleman, and he goes away to a far country to receive a kingdom. Before he left, he called his servants to him, and he gave each of them 1 mina, which was a denomination of money. He told them to go and use that mina, engage in business, and make a profit for his return. And when he returned, 2 of his servants had been obedient to his instructions, but 1 had not. The lazy servant tried to make excuses for why he hadn't done what his master had told him, but the master wouldn't accept his excuses, and he took the mina that he had given to him and he gave it to one of his faithful servants. In section 3, Jesus finally makes it to Jerusalem. This is verses 28 through 40. Before he entered the city, he actually sent 2 of his disciples to find a colt for him in a village that he could ride into the city. And as he rode this colt into Jerusalem, people laid their clothing and palm branches in the road in front of him, and they were praising God, saying, quote, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest." The Pharisees got really mad at this. And they told Jesus that he needed to make his disciples stop saying this because it was blasphemy. But he told them that if the people didn't cry out, the rocks would start yelling out praises. The final section, verses 41 through 48, is a sad section. I just entitled it, Jesus' Distress and Anger at the Spiritual State of Jerusalem. In verses 41 through 48, Jesus wept over the wicked and stubborn hearts of his Jewish countrymen. In verses 45 through 48, some of this frustration comes out of Jesus when he cleanses the temple and casts out the people who were making money there. He said that they had turned a house of prayer into a den of robbers. What can we take from this chapter that helps us fill in kind of the big picture of the Bible? Well, one thing is that the Jewish nation, they had a long history of rebellion against God. And numerous times throughout their history, God had sent prophets to them to express his disapproval with their wickedness. This time, God came in the flesh to correct his people, but they were just as stubborn as they had ever been. And now for our takeaways. I have 2. The first one's pretty simple. And that is that sometimes rich people are open to the gospel message. Jesus himself said that it's hard for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. But there are still some honest hearts among the rich. And Zacchaeus is evidence of that. And secondly, God doesn't look kindly on those who use religion to make a personal profit by taking advantage of other people. And this is clear from what the Lord thought about the people who were basically extorting others in the temple. So we really need to consider our heart and our motives before we're doing any kind of business with people of faith. The last thing that we would ever want to do is to be a stumbling block or a hindrance to people that are doing their best to follow Christ.